yourselves a round of applause. Welcome to Book Fair International. It is a pride and joy of our community, and here at Miami-Dade College, we are simply thrilled to be able to host and to contribute and to volunteer and to partner with you in the community to bring this event here to our home. We're delighted for the next session with Jean Baur and Tracey Stewart. I'd like to first ask you to please turn off your cell phones or anything that could vibrate or be distracting. I'd also like to invite our friends of the book fair, if you could please wave and be acknowledged for your generous contributions that keep us going year after year. And if you're not a friend and you'd like to join our circle of friends, please be certain to connect with us by the end of today. And now I have the distinct pleasure of introducing Judge Monica Gordo, who served our community as a circuit court judge for the last 5 years, and she will be introducing our keynote speakers. Please join me in welcoming Judge Gordo.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. How are you today? Good. Well, we have two amazing authors I'm going to be introducing today. And as Pascal told you, I'm Judge Monica Gordo. I sit in, if you live here in Dade County, which I think some of you do, I sit in your circuit civil division. And I'm happy to be here at the book fair because, like most of you, I'm an avid reader. We're introducing today two authors. First is author Tracey Stewart. She has a book that's come out called Living Mindfully with Animals. In Do Unto Animals, a friendly guide to how animals live and how we can make their lives better. The title of her book. Tracey Stewart provides insight into the secret lives of animals and the kindest ways to live with and alongside of them. The co-founder and president of Farm Sanctuary, the nation's leading farm animal protection organization, Jean Baur, our other author, presents Living the Farm Sanctuary Life, the ultimate guide to eating mindfully, living longer, and feeling better every day. Going back to Tracey Stewart is the editor-in-chief of the website Muma, which provides parents and kids with fun, easy, and effective ways to contribute to varying kinds of nonprofits. She lives on a farm in New Jersey with her husband, John Stewart. Ready for this? She has 2 kids, 4 dogs, 2 pigs, 1 hamster, 3 rabbits, 2 guinea pigs, she's a brave woman, 1 parrot, and 2 fish. All are rescues except for her kids, and I'm imagining her husband. That wasn't on my paper, but I'm pretty sure he's not a rescue. In her new book, Do Unto Animals, a friendly guide to how animals live and how we can make their lives better, Stewart provides insight into the secret lives of animals and the kindest ways to live with and alongside of them. At home, she shows readers how to speak dogese and catese and how to virtually adopt an animal. In the backyard, in her book, we learn about building bee houses, dealing nicely with pesky moles, and creative ways to birdwatch. On the farm, Stewart teaches us what we can do to help all farm animals lead a better life. She reveals superpowers that she believes pigs have. Part practical guide, part memoir of her life with animals, and part testament to the power of giving back, Do Unto Animals is a gift for animal lovers of all stripes. Jean Baur, our second author, is the co-founder and president of Farm Sanctuary, the nation's leading farm animal protection organization, and he was named the conscience of the food movement by Time magazine. He has been featured in the New York Times, Los Angeles Times, Chicago Tribune, and the Wall Street Journal, among many other print outlets, and is a frequent guest on television. He is the author of the bestseller Farm Sanctuary, Changing Hearts and Minds About Animals and Food. In his latest, Living the Farm Sanctuary Life, the ultimate guide to eating mindfully, living longer, and feeling better every day, his book is an inspiring practical book for readers looking to improve their whole lives and the lives of those around them, both 2- and 4-legged. So please give a warm welcome to our 2 authors, Tracey Stewart and Jean Baur.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for being here and for your interest in talking about and thinking about animals and our relationship with other animals. When it comes to animals raised for food, this is an area that not a lot of people pay a lot of attention to. So we'll be talking some about that and about the good things and the not so good things in our world when it comes to our relationship with other animals. At Farm Sanctuary, we started back in the 1980s investigating farms to document conditions and see firsthand what was happening. And we would literally find living animals thrown in trash cans or living animals thrown on piles of dead animals. So we started rescuing them. And we now have sanctuaries in New York and California and soon in New Jersey, which we're extremely excited about. And, once the animals come to Farm Sanctuary, they're our friends, not our food. They get to enjoy their lives. We get to enjoy their lives. And it's a win-win. I've been into these factory farms. I've seen animals in small crates where they can't move, where they're literally clanking against the bars to get out, where they're suffering every day of their lives. And people who work in these places also, to some extent, I think, absorb the stress of that environment. Can you imagine what it's like going into a massive warehouse where you have thousands and thousands of animals lined up in rows in these crates, clanking against the bars, screaming. The air is thick with the toxic fumes from their waste. And it's just a stressful place to be for the animals and for the people. And then, think about a slaughterhouse, what that's like. It's not pleasant for anybody. And you contrast that with a sanctuary where the animals get to enjoy life, where they get to go out and run and play. We have turkeys at Farm Sanctuary that follow you around like puppy dogs. We have sheep who love to be petted, and so you're petting them, and when you stop petting them and walk away, they start pawing at you, saying, "Keep petting me," sort of like a dog would. They're not that different than cats and dogs in terms of their desire to enjoy life, in terms of their ability to recognize people and have memories. And, when the animals first come to us, oftentimes they're very fearful of people because they've only known cruelty and pain when people have approached them. For example, in the industry, it's common for pigs, for example, to have their tails cut off without any painkiller, to be castrated without any painkiller, to have chunks of skin notched out of their ears without any painkiller. And so when a human being approaches them, in the past, it has meant pain. And so oftentimes when they first come to Farm Sanctuary, they're frightened of people because of that experience and that memory. But as time goes, and as they recognize that they're now in a different place, and that when people approach them, it's to get petted, if they're sheep or pigs. For pigs, they love belly rubs. And they start warming up to us. And I think one of the major things that happens as well is the animals at the sanctuary see how the other animals are reacting and recognize that they feel safe and they feel positive about the environment. And the new animal arrivals learn from their other residents and say, this is a sanctuary. This is very different than anything they've experienced before. And so this is a world that is obviously great for the animals, but it's also one that is very good for us. And we encourage people who aren't on a farm, although we also encourage you to come visit the farms, but for folks in cities and just everywhere in this country, just to think about how we eat and to recognize that our food choices have profound impacts on other animals, on ourselves, and on the planet. And I've been a vegan since 1985, meaning I eat no animal foods. I get everything I need from plant foods. And it's been estimated that we could save 70% on healthcare costs in this country by shifting to a whole foods plant-based diet. I mean, so eating plants instead of animals is not only good for animals, it is good for us. And the United Nations put out a report a couple of years ago called Livestock's Long Shadow. And in that report, they talked about how animal agriculture is one of the top contributors to the most serious environmental problems our planet is facing, including climate change. Animal agriculture contributes more to climate change than the entire transportation industry. So this is an industry that is causing enormous harm to animals. It is negatively impacting our own health. It is harming the planet. And most people grow up unwittingly supporting this. I mean, I grew up eating meat because everybody around me was doing it, and I just didn't really think about it. But as time went, and as I started thinking about it, I recognized that I could live well on plants and no animal products, and that's one of the best decisions I've ever made. And everybody has to make their own choice. You know, each of us has to decide what works, but we grow up being bombarded with messages that we need meat for protein. But that's a myth. We can get all the protein we need from plant foods. We're also bombarded with this message that we need to drink cow's milk to get calcium. But in fact, if you look at our country, we drink a lot of cow's milk, but we also have a lot of osteoporosis, which is a calcium deficiency disease. So drinking cow's milk is not solving that problem. So we need to just sort of step back, think about our food choices, make mindful choices, and to do so in a way that we can feel good about. You know, too often what happens when the issue of factory farming comes up and the cruelty associated with it, people say, don't tell me, I don't want to know, because it's too upsetting. But I think it's important for us to pay attention and to know what we're supporting and to take responsibility. And as we do that as a society, I think we're going to see a shift, and we are beginning to see a shift. In fact, the number of farm animals being raised and slaughtered in the US recently started going down. And that is because people are seeing this and they don't think it's okay. So it's never been a better time for our movement. There's more information available online. There's videos, there's pictures of factory farming cruelty, and there's also pictures of animals playing and enjoying life. And we love for people to share those and to educate others about the fact that these are living creatures and we can live with them. And if we can live well without causing unnecessary harm, why wouldn't we? So I guess I'll just end with that and it open up here for Tracey, and then we'll have a discussion and then open up for questions. So thank you all very much.
So before we came out on stage, Gene said he didn't know what he was going to talk about. So I was feeling really confident. But just to start off, I would say that I am a baby vegan. I am new to being vegan, and when I started writing the book, Do Unto Animals, I wasn't vegan. I was a vegetarian. I had been a vegetarian since reading Gene's first book. And then what happened for me was my kids started to get older. I had kids, and I used to be a veterinary technician. And the way that I came to that was that I always loved animals when I was young, but I really loved them. I felt really empathetic, and I thought that I cared so much about them that if I were to pursue that as a career, that it would be somewhat debilitating for me, that it would be too much. And so I went in another direction. I was good at art, and I went and I studied art, and I had a lot of jobs doing design. But I was really unfulfilled. And so it took a little while. I was 27, and my boyfriend at the time, who's my husband now, would say to me that I don't understand for you that you're such a passionate person, and yet you live such a dispassionate life. You don't enjoy what you do, and you don't work on the things that really touch your heart. And so I think he convinced me that I needed to do work that did make me cry. And so I did go back to school, and I became a veterinary technician. And the funny thing that happened was all those things that used to upset me, like what Gene is talking about, I think that a lot of times it's hard to face those things when you feel overwhelmed and you feel like there's not so much that you as an individual can do. But I think as soon as you start to turn that energy into thinking, what could I do? And you start to do those things, whether they're very small things. But I think if you start to feel like you're working your way towards something positive, that there's a real strength that comes from that. And that those things that upset you don't upset you in the same way because you feel like you're helping. You actually, like when I was a veterinary technician, the things that I was fearful about were actually the things that I began to love. Not that it was ever a happy experience when an animal was euthanized, but that was one of the main reasons I didn't want to become that. And I found that actually those were the moments that I loved the most because they were such beautiful moments. There were things that I got to experience with people that were so profound of a saying goodbye and being there to comfort the person that was about to lose the animal and the animal itself. And those are the things that sometimes I think in life we can set ourselves up to be safe. We can listen to our fears. And I think I'm finding as I get older, when I look back at when my life started to get progressively better, it was when I faced my fears. And on the other side of that was something really powerful. And so when I had my kids, I took a break from being a veterinary technician. And I really was focused on keeping them safe, on keeping them from falling down the stairs. And I really just had a myopic vision at that point. And I was overwhelmed, so I wasn't looking to make changes in my life, certainly not dietary changes at that point. And then I found that as they got older, they wanted to go out into the world, and they actually really wanted to do something where their voices could be heard, where they could feel like they had impact. And I had volunteered at a shelter for many years, and I realized that that was a perfect place to take them. So we started going there, and they started making videos for the dogs that were very good with children. So a lot of times even, pit bulls have a difficult time getting adopted. But pit bulls that had been there for a long time and had a good history with children and had been assessed, my kids would do videos for those. They'd make animations for those dogs. And there were several times right after where the dog did get adopted. And so for them, that just made them feel so good and so powerful. And then they would, when we got to a point where we couldn't adopt, we were living in the city at the time, they would do virtual adoption. So they would go in and they would fall in love with someone. And then they would advocate for that animal. And they would make posters and they would tell their friends. And we had a little charm bracelet that we'd make with the pictures of the cats and the dogs, so that when their friends asked about them, they knew where there was somebody waiting for a home for them. So I started to write the book initially with that in mind, because I was feeling like the things that we were doing were so interesting for my parenting, and that it was really improving my parenting and improving the lives of my kids. And so the book first began as that. And then as I started to write and expand out, I started to have to read things that I didn't want to read prior. And I became aware of a lot of things that I had shut the door to knowing. Certainly when we got to writing the farm animal section. But I found that it was so surprising that when I actually faced it and I was aware of it, and it just motivated me to make a change that actually made me happier and then didn't make my life more difficult. And so I'm hoping that with the book that people read it, and it goes slow. And it takes you in lots of different places. And it takes you, I think if we're sitting here right now and talking about being vegan as maybe the only solution, I hope that's not the message that you would leave with. That's not what we're saying. It would be great. It would be super great.
Every step is a good step. Every step is a good step.
Yeah, no.
The vegan's a really good one, but every step is a good step.
But I mean, I'm very new to this myself, and if I think back to how I lived my life several years ago, I was the same compassionate, rational, intelligent person. And I didn't live the life that I'm living now. So I do understand that it's a lot to change all at once. And so when I wrote the book, I did want to show people that there were little things that you could do every day that could just help you to feel good about the way you were living and to connect. And so the middle of the book is about your backyard. And I think like moving out of the city and moving into the suburbs and having a backyard, I was really struck by how other neighbors were talking about the pest problems that they were having in their yards. And for me, having come from the city, I couldn't imagine that they were pests. I really was so happy to see everybody out there. And I would sit and watch and see what they were doing. And I realized they were doing a lot. And so it's funny now because I'll see trucks driving down the street like pest control. And I would hope that people could even change that way of thinking, to not think of them as pests, but to really watch them and see what they're doing out there. And my lawn isn't as green as my neighbors, and that's okay. But I have lots of happy critters running around, and my kids have lots of projects and lots of things to build in the backyard and lots of feeders to fill and animals to watch. And we built a garden, and we built it twice as big as what we wanted, so that when the rabbits got in and when the squirrels got in, it was fine because it was meant for them. So we share. And there's been plenty of, for the amount of greens that we actually eat, there's been plenty. You might have a harder time, Jean. But I hope that, I think the message of what Do Unto Animals is that there are little things that you can do in your life every day. And by doing those things, there really is an impact. I think sometimes when we think about rescuing animals, we think that we're rescuing the animal, but more times than not, we're rescuing ourselves. And I do think when we take these steps towards being kind to other creatures, we're actually being really kind to ourselves, and we're really getting a lot back from doing just that.
No, I think that's so true. When we used to do the undercover investigations and see horrible things, being able to come home with a rescued animal helped heal us as well. As the animals were able to finally lift their head and stand, it sort of lifted our hearts. And then to watch them go out and enjoy life and play also was very inspiring to us. So, this all boils down to what is our relationship with other animals? Mm-hmm. Is it one based on respect, or is it one based on exploitation? And if it's one based on exploitation, there's a whole sort of series, I think, of psychological machinations we go through to feel okay about treating somebody else badly. And when it comes to farm animals, for example, we tend to denigrate them in just the way we speak. Being called a pig is not a compliment, for instance, or being called a turkey is not a compliment. But these are animals that have feelings, and they're individuals, and they develop relationships and friendships. And one of these myths that's out there that I've heard for years is turkeys are so dumb they go outside and drown in the rain. We've been taking care of turkeys for nearly 30 years now, and they're allowed to go in the barn or outside and in the rain or outside, and they've never gone outside and drowned in the rain, So there's these stories we tell ourselves to feel better, I think, about mistreating these others. And this has sort of, I think, been the case over human history. If there are victims of abuse of a more powerful group, there's a tendency to denigrate them. And when it comes to victims in our society today, every year there are over 9 billion farm animals raised and slaughtered under egregious conditions. And that's more than there are people on the planet. And that's the number that are raised and slaughtered every year in the US. These numbers are immense. And it's hard to get your head around that. So I think what's important is to recognize that these are each individuals. When you think 9 billion, you think, wow, I can't comprehend that. But when you recognize it's 1 plus 1 plus 1, each individual, up to 9 billion, that makes it much more real. And each of the animals that live at Farm Sanctuary came out of that system. And each of them has their life transformed. And in a way, our life is transformed too. And our relationship is realigned to be one based on compassion and respect. And that is good for everybody involved. There's that quote that I love: we don't see the world as it is, we see the world as we are. And I've heard factory farm people talk so often about how these animals are violent. There was this one pig farmer, for example, who visited our farm years ago, and he saw some of our volunteers in the pig barn taking care of these 500-pound sows. And this pig farmer was genuinely worried about the well-being of our volunteers. He said, those pigs are going to attack you. And I told him that we had never had this experience of pigs attacking us, and that often they come in frightened, but they learn to trust us, they learn they're in a safe place, and they've never acted in a violent way towards us. And this farmer said, look, I've raised pigs for years, I understand these animals, you can't trust them. And to make his point, he told a story about a mother pig who had babies, and he took her babies away, and she came after him. And he told this story to make the point that these are violent animals, without having any clue or recognition that his behavior caused this mother to react when her babies were taken away. It's a natural, instinctual reaction that most mothers would have. But this farmer didn't see that, and instead said this is a violent animal, and the solution to that is you put them in small crates so you can control their behavior and prevent that aggression in their mind. So we start doing these sort of mental machinations to create a world that we feel better about, and too often that means denigrating these individuals who we have mistreated. And, to me, being vegan is really an aspiration to live as kindly as possible. It's not an endpoint, it's an ongoing process. And it's not an ingredient list. For example, as a vegan, I will often buy organic produce, which is probably grown with slaughterhouse byproducts, meat and bone meal, for instance. And so theoretically, if it's an ingredient list, that wouldn't be vegan. But it's an aspiration, and each of us can do better each day, and it's a process, and there's not an endpoint to it. So now New Jersey.
All right. I wanted to say one thing about that, which is I think sometimes we can stop ourselves from making a change in our life because we think that there's a certain way that we have to do it. And I know, like for my husband, when he was struggling to become a vegetarian, he kept bringing up the Second Avenue deli basket that we get every year at the holidays. And so he would, have all these other ideas, but when that Second Avenue deli basket entered his mind, he would say, I just don't think I can do it. And so finally I said, how about you just do it until the Second Avenue deli basket comes every year and you let yourself, eat it. And it's funny because what has happened is then the basket comes and he doesn't want to eat it anymore. But, I think if there's something that you're afraid of, and that's a reason why you're telling yourself not to move forward, think about what you could do, and then just know that you'll get a little further down the path. But it really, I think sometimes I've met certain vegans that really think that their way of being vegan is the way. And I think the important thing to remember is no one is the boss of you. So you can do it however you want, in whatever way that you want to do it. There's this idea too of like, well, I have a whole collection of beautiful leather shoes and I have a leather bag, and if I go vegan, then I won't be able to wear them anymore. But who's telling you that? And my friend calls that freegan. That's free. It's free because before you thought differently, you bought those clothes. And so if you have to wear them and that's the one thing that's stopping you from making other change in your life, then go ahead and do that. And I think what ends up happening is then you realize, like, you find other things that you don't want to wear as much. Or you find other things that you do want to wear. But I do think that sometimes people stop themselves because of that, and I would love to just have that be a message too, that like do it in whatever way you can. It's just about living kindly, and it's just about making decisions every day. And I know, like, as far as food goes, I make the decision to eat all day long. I'm eating constantly. And so I do feel like that was one reason that I thought, like, oh my, that's gonna complicate my life so much. But the reality of it was that it didn't. I have celiac disease also, so I had to go and change my diet for that. And when I did that and realized how easy that was, then the other was also just as easy. So I think there's sometimes things that you can tell yourself that make you stop, and it's good to really look at that and think, what's real about that?
No, I think that's such an important point. We're afraid, and that fear prevents us from doing anything. But when it comes to our daily choices about food especially, we have a lot of control over that. There's a lot of things in this world we don't have control over, but when we're at the grocery store, we can make very concrete choices, and if we're mindful about those choices, it can make a big difference. And each of us does have a lot of power to shift, but small things are the way to go, because shifting overnight can seem very daunting, but just being mindful and paying attention. One of the reasons that things have gotten as bad as they have is we've just not paid attention. We've gone along with what everybody around us is doing. Like I mentioned before, I grew up eating meat because everybody around me was doing it, and I didn't really think about it. And then when I went vegan, then all of a sudden everybody was thinking about it, going, what's this all about, Food is also very emotional, and we have attachments to it. It's tied to our identity. Human beings forever have gotten together around food, and it's part of our community. Comida, the word, means food and community are connected. And how we get together and gather as human beings, it can be challenging being a vegan in a non-vegan world. And I think for vegans, it's important to recognize that not everybody is seeing this yet. And for non-vegans, I think it's good to recognize that for vegans, this is something that's very emotionally important, to see living animals as not too different than cats and dogs. And so there is now, I think, more awareness and more discussion and open discussion about these issues, which is challenging because, again, they are emotional. And for people who grow up in a family where the parents really do care about the children, want to feed them well, and then the children, when they get into teenage or high school, college, and say, I want to go vegan, sometimes the parents feel like they're being rejected. There's that whole emotional thing about it. But I think a better way to look at it is that the children have learned to think and to be careful and mindful about their choices and responsible, essentially, too, and accountable for their choices. And that's happening a lot now, where the young folks are starting to make these kinds of choices. And it can lead to some challenges in social dynamics. But the intent should not be to put anybody down. The intent always should be to support positive shifts. And, as Tracey was saying, nobody has all the answers. We're all works in progress. We can all learn from each other. Benjamin Franklin said, if everybody thinks the same way, nobody's thinking. And I think that's a very valuable thing to remember. There are different perspectives, different ways to go about this. And each of us is on our own path. But I think most people would rather live in a way that is rooted in compassion and respect and responsibility and causing less harm as opposed to causing more harm. I think it's impossible to live without causing any harm, but I think most of us would generally prefer to cause less harm. I think most of us would rather eat food that is nourishing and doesn't lead to the chronic diseases we have in this country, like heart disease and cancer and diabetes, and we could reduce the risks of those by eating plants instead of animals, even by just shifting bit by bit in that direction. And I think most of us would rather live on a planet that's not being polluted and where scarce resources like water are not being despoiled by this industry that is so wasteful. 70% of the corn and 90% of the soybeans produced in the US are fed to farm animals. We could feed so many more people without using nearly as many resources by eating plants instead of animals. So these are all the facts to look at. But it's also important to recognize that we are individuals that have emotional attachments, and to look at those and determine what ultimately serves us well, what serves our families well, what serves our planet well. And as we delve into these issues, we can start making small shifts. And then besides our food, it's just how we relate in our backyard to animals, and seeing animals as co-inhabitants of the planet, and paying attention there too, and seeing the beauty that exists in nature and appreciating it. And it just sort of shifts our attitude towards one of respect and one wonderment in a way. And I think, children especially have a real kind of openness and ability to see things that sometimes as we grow up, we become adulterated and don't quite see the same way. And your children, I think, are very much enjoying time with animals.
Yeah, very much so. And so Jean had started to mention the farm. So my husband and I bought a farm in New Jersey, and our idea was to start an animal sanctuary because our kids were really getting involved and enjoying that. And I had spent time up at Farm Sanctuary, and that had been really transformative for me, and a really positive experience where you really do fall in love and you make friends up there. And so I wanted to do something closer to our home where there were a lot of people. So we bought this farm, and now it will be the 4th branch of Farm Sanctuary. And what we're going to do with it is make it an educational center. So the idea is that kids will come in each year. So hopefully one of the things that we'll accomplish is that in 2nd grade, the kids come in, and maybe when they're on the farm, it's an art lesson that year. When they're in 3rd grade, maybe they're learning to grow something. 4th grade, there's a math lesson. But what they're going to learn to do is cook food, grow food, to see that they can give a little bit of care to something and it can grow into something really big. They're going to be taking care of animals and watching animals be taken care of, and then also be able to see animals taken care of back. We're going to have a lot of therapy there. We'd love to have some things for veterans and with horses, doing therapy for that. My daughter volunteers for something called Gentle Carousel, where they're tiny little horses that can go into hospitals and go into places where, or nursing homes, where larger horses can't go, and she's been doing that. So we really do want to create this space where people come year in and year out, and they see the same animals. But because I do think that's what happens sometimes with our dogs and cats, we really get to see them and watch them. So the idea that somebody would say animals don't have feeling, if we're looking at our dogs or our cats, seems crazy. But somehow, like if someone's saying something about a pig or a cow, it doesn't seem so crazy. But when you really are there, and when you're spending time and you're falling in love and you're getting this back and forth, you do feel it, and you feel it in such a great way that when you make the changes in your life in other ways, it doesn't feel like there's a loss. It really feels like there's a powerful gain that's happened for you. And with the book, I've been approached a lot by people wanting to have a reality show based on me, which will never happen. Never. But I sometimes think, like, I just wish that someone could follow me around for a little while with a camera and see how happy I am, and see like how much I eat and how much I enjoy my food and my life and my wine and my kids and my relationships with animals. Like, I really sometimes do wish that, but not enough. Not enough to become a Kardashian, so that's not going to happen. But
when you start living your passion, it's a beautiful thing,
Yes.
And that's the other thing about being mindful and looking at our actions and being responsible for them and living in a way we feel good about and not having to be dissonant and think, oh, I don't want to see that. Mm-hmm. It's a beautiful thing that happens and it's a process. So no reality show then, huh? Yeah, no. And so when you eat on a daily basis, like what kind of stuff do you enjoy eating? What's some of your...
Oh, God, so many things. Well, my new favorite thing is that I discovered Kite Hill makes a cream cheese, a chive cream cheese. And so in the morning, I'll have a gluten-free bagel with that chive cream cheese and a slice of tomato and salt and pepper, and that's been my very bad thing that I've been doing. And I've been doing protein shakes in the morning with fruit and kale. And then lunch, I'll have lentils and rice, and then I'll snack on fruits during the day, and then I'll have another like big type of stew at night, like kale, rice, and some tempeh or things like that. Would be my favorite food would be that during the day.
And tempeh's got tons of protein in it. Tempeh is a really good protein thing. And I've been, the green smoothies, do you do those very much? Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've done a few marathons and did an Ironman triathlon. And so when I'm training for those, I hit the green smoothies big time, and right now I'm not really training for anything. So, and when you're training, you're burning a lot of calories, so you got to eat so much. And in my book, Living the Farm Sanctuary Life, I've got a recipe from Rich Roll, who's this Ultraman vegan triathlete that does like double Ironman distance stuff. And he gave us a tempeh meatloaf recipe. And when we made it in the office, it was massive. Because, as an Ultraman triathlete, you're doing enormous amounts of training, so you need enormous amounts of energy. And so I think how you eat, really, it makes sense for it to reflect your level of activity.
That's why I eat so much.
And it's so true, and when you are mindful about your food and recognize what it does to you, that also can be very healthy. Mm-hmm. In this country, we're kind of addicted to sugar and things like that, and we just kind of get into this routine where we don't recognize that. By shifting how we eat, we can really start feeling much better, mm-hmm. Physically as well as emotionally. Children, for example, if they eat a lot of sugar at a certain, like at noon, like by 1 o'clock, it can be a pretty challenging afternoon, And so our food choices have impacts on our well-being too, mm-hmm. that we don't think about. And, heart disease, kills more people in this country than anything else. And we could reduce our risk in a huge way. And unfortunately, our medical profession is not very well informed about the benefits of plant-based eating. I'm in my 50s now, and I hadn't been to a doctor in decades. So I went to a doctor a few years ago just to get a checkup, make sure everything's okay. And the doctor starts asking me questions about heart disease in my family. And I told him that my father died of a heart attack, or rather my grandfather died of a heart attack. My father had a heart attack. And without taking any blood tests or anything like this, he tells me that he might want to put me on heart medication. And I was like astounded. And so I left that hospital and didn't go back. And then I went to another hospital. They took my blood work and it all came back fine. But, too often our medical profession is too quick to prescribe drugs that we don't need if we eat in a more mindful, healthy way. And then the other thing about the whole pharmaceutical business is that the majority of the drugs that are used in the United States are fed to farm animals in these factory farms to keep them alive and growing in these filthy, horrendous conditions because of the stress and the disease and everything. So now you have the development of antibiotic-resistant bacteria. And there's been efforts for years in Washington, D.C. to pass laws to limit the use of these antibiotics in feeding farm animals, but unfortunately it has not been able to pass because agribusiness is so influential in Washington, D.C. And, I live near Washington, D.C., and I've seen sort of how that process works, and it is pretty frustrating. So I think where the real change is going to happen, and it is starting to happen, is with individual consumers making more thoughtful choices and making food decisions that are aligned with our own interests and aligned with our own values. And as that happens, things are changing. As I mentioned, the number of animals being killed are starting to go down. There are actually companies now that have been created specifically to provide meatless alternatives to meat. And there's like a company called Beyond Meat, for example, that's making chicken, quote unquote chicken, out of pea and soy protein. And because plant foods are far more efficient to grow, it's going to be less expensive than meat from chickens. And the New York Times food critic couldn't tell the difference in a taste test.
Yeah, I swear, that is good.
Yeah. So there's this massive shift happening now in the marketplace. And each person who votes with our dollars, can play a role in bringing about this shift. And it's happening like never before.
And if a couple of years ago you tried some of the alternatives and they were disgusting, you were right, they were disgusting, but I'm telling you now there are just so many great alternatives. And you might still, when you go to venture in, you might find one that is terrible.
Yeah.
But don't let that stop you, because there really are such great foods right now. It's really exciting.
And there's apps too, like Happy Cow, that tells you where the vegan food is and the plant-based foods. So, you can find vegan restaurants or places that have vegan food. So I was at a dinner last night with Miami Seed Food and Wine Festival, and there were like 4 amazing chefs, not vegan chefs, but they were producing these incredible recipes at this restaurant. And so it's a creative process, and the vegan culinary world is really taking off too. There's this restaurant in LA called Crossroads. It's amazing. And so it's getting increasingly satisfying to eat plant foods. Years ago I used to just be happy to see the word vegan on a menu. Now I'm thinking it better taste good, because so often people try it and there's a general kind of prejudice about it, right? And a feeling that, well, if it's vegan, it can't be that good. But that's not the case at all. And this food is getting tastier than ever, and you have real artists creating amazing. There's a place not far from you in Jersey, right, that's got some
it's really funny. We are a minute away from 2 incredible vegan restaurants where we live, so that's really exciting. We also went to dinner last night. What was the name of the restaurant? Talde. And it's not a vegan restaurant. And so, I think whenever I go into a restaurant, I really try to be extra, extra nice. Because first I'm telling them I have a gluten allergy, and then I'm telling them I'm vegan, so I'm already, so I try to be really, really nice. And we went in and we just told them what our limitations were as far as what we could eat on the menu, and they got so excited about it. And the chef got so excited about it, and they went and they created a whole meal for us that was so fabulous, so delicious. And they were mushrooms in a teriyaki sauce on a skewer with some spicy ginger on the side. They made us, they took coconut rice and fried it up so that it was crispy, and it tasted more delicious than like an unagi sushi with avocado and some spice, and it was great. And then you do feel like then your whole experience is more interactive almost. I mean, as long as you're someplace where they're excited to do that for you. And there are times where that's not the case, and I never make a stink about that.
Yeah, I sometimes make a stink, a small stink, but a little stink.
You stink.
No, but it's true. You want to be respectful and realize that people are working and they're, maybe very stressed. But it's wonderful, so wonderful when they embrace the challenge and create amazing food.
I don't make a stink. I just make it look like I'm really sad.
I don't really make a big stink, But just interacting.
Yeah.
Sometimes just by being vegan and asking. People sometimes act defensively in a strange way, and so it really is a challenge to be able to communicate in a way that's not going to upset people, because, I think, again, these are very emotional issues. How do we eat? And if somebody hears you're a vegan, sometimes they internalize it. What, are they judging me for being mean? And that's not at all the intent, but that is oftentimes, I think, the emotional feeling, and it's understandable. I mean, most people are humane, most people don't want to support cruelty, and I think a lot of times people are afraid because they don't know what they can do instead. And so a big part of this is just being a positive example and being inspiring and supportive of any sort of positive change. And that meal you had last night sounds incredible. Wow, yeah. So I think we're getting close to opening it up for questions. So if anybody wants to ask anything or raise any thoughts or things, there's a microphone over here in the middle. And I think folks should go there and ask or raise questions if you'd like to.
I just want to say it's a real privilege to be in the room with you, and I so admire vegans. 7 years ago, I went to the pescatarian phase. Just a little funny quote, I have a cousin who's been a pescatarian for 40 years, and he just said, instead of, feeding grains and plant food to animals, let's just eliminate the middleman, and eat it ourselves. And it's so true. But what I wanted to say is, will you be taking volunteers? Because I would love, I've been a volunteer for 4 years with the Humane Society, and they asked me to help today at a fundraiser at the Fontainebleau, and I said, going to see Tracey Stewart.
Yay!
Got her book. So will you be taking volunteers?
Yes, we will. Everyone will actually be hired through Farm Sanctuary.
Okay.
We believe, right? And so we will be taking volunteers, and that's actually been such a nice part for me living in my own community, is as I go around, it used to be that my husband was always the one that was stopped, and now I'm getting stopped left and right with people that really want to be involved, and it's a beautiful thing. And I went to pick up a prescription before I came down, and the woman behind the counter said, are you going to be having volunteers, because I really need to be there. And I said, yeah, no, I'll let you know as soon as we're ready. She said, I just got diagnosed with breast cancer, and I feel like it would be a really important thing for me to be there, so please let me know. And it's things like that where you feel, I'm just so excited for what's going to happen in that space. I feel like there's going to be a lot of just beautiful relationships that get to happen there.
Great, okay.
And I'm excited that you want to come.
I am, and I have a business card to give you if you want it.
Good.
Thank you.
Hi, a couple things. When my kids were young, of course, they did the birthday parties where everybody couldn't bring a gift. They had to bring dog food or cat food for the shelter. Now, my youngest just went away to UF, and guess what she asked for her birthday? Her father and I can only have non-vegetarian meals 3 times a week, and her sisters get 5. And we have to do it for a month, and that's her present. And of course, the photos have to go through. Here's another vegetarian meal. Anyway, she's in, her field is designing habitat, because we are breeding a lot of endangered species in zoos because we can't seem to save native habitat. And I want you to talk a little bit about the funding of how we can fund animal habitat for wild animals or animals that we have bred in captivity. And also in Florida, a big issue is horses. It seems like the horse industry is a rich one. I mean, people make millions on these big thoroughbreds, and yet we have a real horse problem here of horses aging and it being very expensive for people to keep them. And so they let the horses starve. So just to talk about how we can regulate the same industry to pay for down the line horses, kind of like in the military, we're still paying for VA services all the way down the life of a person who serves in the military, how we can get it for horses specifically, but maybe some other animals as well.
Yeah, well, I think habitat preservation is critically important, and we just keep gobbling up acreage and turning it too often into cropland to raise food for farm animals. In South America, rainforests are being destroyed, so soybeans can be grown to feed to animals in China right now. And, across the U.S., we have vast acreages that are being tilled and plowed every year for feed for farm animals. And unfortunately, government incentives encourage this. And every year, we spend something like $100 billion through the Farm Bill to support farm programs. And this helps to support the production of cheap corn and soybeans to feed farm animals, so meat is cheaper than it really should be in the marketplace. So I think one of the things that has to happen is that federal policies need to sort of catch up with, you know, where a lot of the public is and where the science is, and to promote a healthy, sustainable food system instead of one that is very exploitive and depleting. When it comes to horses, there are programs to round up horses out west, for example, to get them off of federal land, BLM land, so that cattle can graze there. And then a lot of these horses are then held in stockyards and then sometimes have been sent to slaughter. So this a lot of times links back to the animal agriculture industry, which is massive and uses about half of the land in the US is used for animal agriculture. So if we're going to start moving towards habitat preservation, that's a very important place to look. Horses are related, but they're sort of on the margins, and they are important as well. But it all boils down ultimately to the factory farming and animal agriculture issue.
And not to plug my own website, but Do Unto Animals this month has an article about all of that written by Joanne Normile, who started Cantor and wrote the book Saving Baby. And she really goes into great detail how you can make a difference, and now also just really what goes on with horses and how they really are considered disposable, and they really do end up in slaughterhouses and in as food.
Well, first I'd like to say that I've bought something like 15 copies of Tracey's book, and she's not paying me for this, but it's beautiful, and it makes for a wonderful Christmas or any holiday gift, so yeah.
Thank you, Aunt Jeannie.
Great. Here, honey, see you later. Well, my husband and I are animal lovers and have been for a long time. We always say that we're aspiring vegans. We're a long way off still, but we have 4 rescued cats and 2 dogs. This was not Planned Parenthood, long story. But this is a little off the, you know, I don't know if it really belongs in this discussion, but I just wondered, since you deal with animals every day, if you find that any of the animals that you deal with are psychic. They see things that you don't see. We've had some very strange experiences that have been very positive. You know, my one dog and one cat has let me know actually of a health condition I had. And I just wonder if in general, because you see so many more than I do, if you have noticed any, they see things that are not there, or they, I don't know. I just
You
wonder.
can speak to that too, but I mean, I really do think, you know, when we talk about intelligence, and we talk about ourselves as having the highest intelligence, I do think that animals have different intelligences, and because they don't have some of the things that we have, I believe that they have other things. And I certainly believe in my own home that my animals are really present in a way that humans are not. And that they see things and smell things and are aware of things emotionally. I was up at Farm Sanctuary, and Susie Costin, who is the national director up there, was being interviewed for a film. And she started to cry, and she was talking about a difficult time that she had gone through in her life. And there was a pig up there named Sebastian who, you know, snaps at most people, but loves Susie very much. And when Susie started to cry, he was outside of the barn, and he heard her crying, and he came into the barn, and he lied next to her. And just stayed with her until she was done with the interview. And you know, it really was, he knew what was happening.
Now, there's an empathy, and these animals have relationships, and they pay attention, and they're in the moment, and they really do comfort us in many ways, you know, and we should pay attention to them too and treat them with respect. And it's a beautiful thing when that happens, like you described.
I mean, they really are paying attention to us.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
We really deserve to do better back to them.
And it's being present, it's paying attention, and then being mindful, and then ultimately responsible, and living in a way we can feel good about. And when it comes to how we treat other animals, that sort of helps define who we are. And it's a beautiful thing to see when that sort of healing goes back and forth. And
it always does.
It does, always, absolutely.
I'm Susan Hargreaves with Animal Hero Kids, and we do programs here in Florida and internationally and nationally rewarding and recognizing kids who have helped and rescued animals. And I've been doing this for many years, and I've noticed a distinct change in the schools where kids, after a program, we do vegan animal hero sandwich making. And I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit about how much it has changed as far as what you can get here in Publix. It's not a matter of taking away what you normally eat. It's just a matter of replacing it. I've been vegan since 1984, and there was powdered soy milk back then. Now compare that today with all of the silks and the coconut milks, and if you could just speak a little bit about if an average person with an average pocket finance goes into Publix here locally, what can they buy that would replace the products that they currently have that's healthier for them, healthier for the planet, and kinder for the animals?
And Jean can speak very well to this, but I did want to say that I recognize you, and I've been on your site, and I love what you do, and thank you so much. And I would love to talk to you later about doing more.
Yeah, I brought a book for you and your kids, Animal Hero Kids.
Oh, thank you. Great.
Thank you.
You know, I think it's a really good point that vegan food is so much more easily available now than it's ever been before. And instead of cow's milk, you can go to a mainstream supermarket and get coconut milk and soy milk and almond milk. There are alternatives to butter made from cow's milk, and there are growing alternatives to cheese. And there are also meat analogs like meatless meatballs that you see in freezer sections at supermarkets. So it's never been easier. And then plus, you also just have the regular old vegan foods like beans and rice and fruits and vegetables and whole grains. And so the options are increasingly available, and it's easy to substitute and easy just to eat good, healthy, whole plant foods. In Living the Farm Sanctuary Life, we have 100 amazing recipes and tips on taking steps in that direction too.
And I do think getting kids to actually grow food is very powerful. I know for my own kids, when we have things that we've grown in the garden, they're much more receptive and more excited about eating that. They're also more excited when they've made something themselves. So I think cooking and growing for this younger generation will be very helpful.
It really connects them to the source of their food, and people are engaged, and it's empowering and hopeful to see seeds grow.
And we've been so disconnected from that, and so I think I see a trend to moving back to that, which I'm very excited about.
That's totally a reason that I feel very optimistic. There's this food movement now. People want to get closer to the source of their food, and as we do, we take more responsibility, and we're connected, which is so positive.
Well, we like the idea of ending on an optimistic note. And with that, we want to thank you, and this is the end of this session. We truly appreciate your being with us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much.